So that's my passion. And speaking of nutrition, I have an intern. So I actually have two interns, Asia over there and Jessica Tucker here. So Jessica's, when she said, hey, can I intern with you? And then I heard her story, I thought, well, holy cow, this is exciting, because I had just looked up Dr. Bernstein and had not, because I was working with a client and trying to figure out, who's really got who's figured it all out. And it was really clear to me that Dr. Bernstein had. So with no further ado, here's Jessica Tucker. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Hey everybody, thank you so much for coming out tonight. As Sarah said, my name's Jessica Tucker. I am in my senior year, actually my last semester of my senior year at the University of Alabama, studying food and human nutrition. I'm so ready to be done. But that being said, today I invited everybody to come tonight because we want to talk a little bit about the fact that if you have diabetes, it is possible to have normal blood sugars. Contrary to conventional wisdom, contrary to what your endocrinologists and other practitioners will tell you, what the American Diabetes Association will tell you, it is possible. I want to tell you a little bit more about that, but first let me just give you a brief bit of my story. This is me in 1987, healthy, normal, happy 7-year-old kid, very, very active, always running around outside, having a good time. And then 1988 came along, first day of school. That spring, I came down with the chicken pox, and it was a nasty case of chicken pox. But I did get better from the chicken pox, but I didn't, because after that, everything kind of started to change. I stopped growing, I was more and more lethargic, I was in horrible stomach pain and leg pain. My mom tells me I would wake up in the night just crying and screaming out of pain. They kept taking me to the the pediatrician, and he just kept saying, she's growing, it's normal, she'll be fine. But I kept getting sicker and I kept getting weaker. I remember one day I was sitting on the side of the road, or at the side of the driveway, watching my friends all play baseball, and I was just wishing that I had the energy to go play with them, but I couldn't because I was very, very sick. And from then on, I was going to the bathroom every 5 minutes. I was drinking gallons of water, eating like crazy, but losing weight. And as you can see, this picture on the right, that is 3 days before my life completely changed. I had lost all of my muscle tone and my body fat. I'd gone. Well, what was that? Oh, I'm the blonde. Well, I guess there's two blondes. The older blonde, the taller blonde.
The blue shirt.
Yes, the blue shirt. I had lost all of the healthy weight that I had, and I think I was about 45 pounds at that point. I'd gone from being a normal, healthy kid to a very, very sick little girl. 3 days after that, one morning, my mom couldn't rouse me. I had turned blue, and she knew I was close to death. So Mom and Dad, they're sitting back there in the back, rushed me to the hospital, and they tested my blood sugar. I was over 1,000.
Oh my God.
And they finally, after almost 2 years of being sick, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So, in 1988, we didn't have all the cool stuff that we have now. This was my first blood sugar monitor. Took 5 minutes to get a reading. And it's 3 times the size of the one that I use today, because that's the one that I use today. There was no such thing as continuous glucose monitors, and there were only 2 insulins that were available. It was regular Humulin R and Humulin NPH. Humulin R takes about 2 hours to kick in, so that means you have to be super careful with timing meals and everything. Humulin NPH only lasts about 6 hours. So it requires a lot more frequent injections. So basically, the day that I was diagnosed, my parents had taken me to the USF Diabetes Research Center. They put me on a regimen of those 2 insulins and sent me home, telling them, don't ever let her have sugar again.
Okay.
So fast forward to 1996. Now I'm 16 years old, and this wonderful new thing comes on the market, Humalog insulin. Now this was the first ever fast-acting insulin, which meant all of a sudden, bring on the carbs. I can eat cookies and cake and and ice cream and all the things that my friends wanted to eat and were eating. And I was so excited that I immediately jumped on the roller coaster. Because that's what it is. What they don't tell you is that insulin, that Humalog insulin, as wonderful as it was, it doesn't act fast enough to cover those foods. So with those things came high blood sugars. And the problem is once your blood sugar gets high, your body gets even more resistant to insulin, so you have to take larger amounts of insulin, which means then you have more drastic lows, which means you're roller coastering up and down and up and down.
Right, and but what they keep saying in the typical diabetes counseling, especially for children, is, oh, we want your kid to be back and kind of normal and be able to eat all this stuff with other kids.
Right.
And this is one of the biggest challenges.
So for years, I rode this roller coaster up and down and up and down. If my blood sugar got below 150, I felt shaky and unclear. I felt sick. I loved sports and was very, very active, but despite that, I developed polycystic ovarian syndrome and started gaining weight unexplainedly. And then my eyesight started to go. This was the fun one. At one point, I'd had as many as 50,000 blasts of laser surgery. And they also had to go in and do actual surgery to save my eyesight. Thank goodness they saved it, but at the same time, I was never feeling good. So I rode that roller coaster for 19 years. I would swing between an A1C, which is of 8, which is an average blood sugar of 208, and an A1C of 13, which is an average blood sugar of 386. And every time I went to the doctor, I felt so defeated because I knew I needed to get my blood sugars down, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. So a couple years later, as I was going through all this,
You're high speeding through.
oh shoot. I hit the wrong button. I should probably leave this right here. No, back. Oh wow, I went way, way far.
Yeah.
How did that happen? Holy crap. Oh no, I'm going the wrong way now. Okay, there we go. So I knew I needed to figure out how to lower my blood sugars, but I couldn't figure out how. So a couple years into this, my doctors told me, I had an unrelated health scare, and they told me that if I didn't get my diabetes under control, it was gonna kill me. So I buckled down, did everything I could, followed every instruction, and got my A1C down to 7. And they all said, you're doing so great, that's perfectly controlled diabetes. But that's still an average blood sugar of 170. And I was still dealing with all the roller coaster up and down and all the complications. So deep down I knew there had to be a better way. So then in 2016, I met this girl named Dana. I had joined an online community of type 1 diabetic athletes, and she was telling me that she had had an A1C in the 5s for several years. And I said, well, how did you do that? She told me about Dr. Bernstein and a whole giant group of type 1 diabetics who manage their blood sugars to keep them in a normal range through a low-carb, high-protein diet. Now, I'm sure everybody's heard of keto. It's kind of the thing to do right now. It's not keto, and it's not Atkins. That's the other thing that a lot of people know of. This is a very, Yeah, it's a specific, carefully developed plan that it's a protocol that was developed by a type 1 diabetic who has had type 1 diabetes for 73 years. So I was like, whoa, this sounds cool, let's look into it. So I started reading everything I could. And this is how I found out about Dr. Richard K. Bernstein. Now, Dr. Richard K. Bernstein was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1946 at the age of 12. And for over 20 years, he followed the prevailing wisdom of the day, which is a low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. And despite following doctor's orders super, super closely, he developed all kinds of complications, including end-stage renal disease. Now, that's a scary one. So he did this for 20 years, and by 1969, he had had enough. At that time, blood sugar monitors were not readily available. The only people who could have them were hospitals and physicians. And his wife, he happened to be married to a doctor. So he said, hey, can you get me a blood sugar monitor? And so she did. And he started checking his blood sugar very, very frequently, and he was tweaking his diet and tweaking his insulin, and spent a full year trying to figure out how to normalize his blood sugars. And he found out that the only way he could do that was by cutting carbohydrates out of his diet. So he achieved normal blood sugars. It's amazing, right? Everybody's gonna wanna know about this. Problem is, he wasn't a doctor. So they wouldn't let him publish. And even despite the fact that he had managed to reverse his end-stage renal disease, all of his complications had gone away, nobody wanted to hear about it because he wasn't a doctor. So at age 45, Dr. Bernstein went back to medical school, became a doctor. He wrote the book, Dr. Bernstein's Diabetes Solution, and opened a practice that is dedicated solely to helping diabetics achieve normal blood sugars and heal from or prevent the complications that were happening from the prevailing medical wisdom. And now he's been living with type 1 diabetes for 73 years. Dr. Bernstein is 84 years old this year. He just turned 84 a few weeks ago, I believe. He exercises every day, including weightlifting. He runs a thriving medical practice and sees patients 8 hours a day. And he maintains an average blood sugar of 83, which is the perfect normal blood sugar level. That's an A1C of 4.9, I believe, or 4.5. So the average life expectancy for a male with type 1 diabetes is only 69 years old. So how has Dr. Bernstein managed to defy the odds and still living a healthy, active life 15 years past the year he was supposed to die? It's this thing, the law of small numbers. Basically, small inputs create small, small inputs create small changes, which require small corrections. Basically, small amounts of slow-acting carbohydrates mean you have to take small amounts of insulin, which means you have small amount of error, and then you get these beautiful lines. That Dexcom, I'm kind of proud of that line, that's me. Blood sugar 80, straight across. It took me a long time to get to that point, but it is possible. So let me break it down a little bit more. This is the complicated science, so I'm going to read it a little bit more carefully. The building blocks of all carbohydrates, from bread to rice to apples, is glucose. And those glucose molecules, glucose is sugar. So what this means is that when you eat anything with carbohydrates, and it doesn't matter whether it's bread, rice, apples, potatoes, whatever it is, it becomes sugar once it's broken down. So if you have a normal metabolism, it's no big deal because glucose is the body's preferred form of energy. And your body easily utilizes the sugar that comes from eating those things because it naturally produces insulin. And as most of you already know, insulin is the key that unlocks the cells in your body so that you can use the glucose for fuel. Unfortunately, type 1 diabetics don't make insulin because they had an autoimmune response which killed the beta cells that produce insulin.
And the beta cells are in the pancreas.
The beta cells are in the pancreas, yeah. And I thought this was funny. There's a dead organ floating in my body. There is. So yeah. Now type 2 diabetes is a different side of the same coin. They still produce insulin, but the body becomes resistant to that insulin. And this tends to happen when people have extra weight around their midsection. And because their body is so resistant to the insulin they're making, type 2 diabetics often have this situation called hyperinsulinemia. That means they have very high levels of insulin floating in their system. But the problem is what that's doing is it's causing their beta cells to burn out, which is why most type 2 diabetics end up needing insulin shots eventually at some point in their life. So basically, people with diabetes can't break down carbohydrates. No big deal. Just take a shot of fast-acting insulin and everything works out, okay, right? Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. Injectable insulin doesn't work exactly like the insulin that a body is supposed to make. So when a person with a normal metabolism eats carbohydrates, their body releases insulin in 2 phases. The first phase happens as soon as carbohydrates hit your mouth. The salivary amylase in your mouth, that's an enzyme, starts to break down that carbohydrate into sugar, which signals your pancreas, if it's working, to release the insulin that's been stored in there, which keeps your blood sugar from going too high. Now, for the diabetics, we don't have that. We don't have any stored insulin, either because your body's resistant to it and it's not storing it, and because it's kicking it out so fast, or like for me, my body just doesn't make insulin. So that phase 1 insulin response is completely gone. So the problem is the insulin we inject doesn't work as well as the stuff the body is supposed to make. We inject it into fat. That's usually how we do it. That's how they teach you when you first go get diagnosed. Inject it into fat, but that slows the absorption. So by the time the insulin kicks in, your blood sugar is already way higher than it should be, and that causes complications. So what's the solution here? The solution is, instead of eating fast-acting carbohydrates, let's limit carbohydrate intake to slow-acting fibrous vegetables. And the reason for this is the slow digestion of these foods actually matches the action time of the insulin that we take or the oral medications that you're being used. I think metformin, the fast-acting metformin, takes 2 hours to kick in. So by limiting intake of carbohydrates to just the slow digesting ones, you actually skip that phase 1 insulin response that's missing, and it hits right at that phase 2 insulin response. So you don't have any trouble with that. So the result of Dr. Bernstein's protocol is predictable, stable, normal blood sugar levels, and there's that wonderful graph again. This means that we can escape the complications that come from high blood sugars, like heart disease, kidney disease, neuropathy, retinopathy, amputations, all those horrible stories when you hear, oh, my grandmother had diabetes and she died of triple amputations and they had to cut her head off, and all those fun things. So we don't necessarily have to do that. So does this sound different than what you heard when you were diagnosed, if you're diagnosed? Yeah. It is different, but it isn't, because Dr. Bernstein's protocol is actually very similar to how diabetics were treated 100 years ago, before the advent of exogenous insulin. Dr. Frederick Allen was a physician in the early 1900s. And in the early 1900s, diabetes was a death sentence. So Dr. Allen started treating diabetics with a diet that was high in fat and protein, but very, very low in carbohydrates. And he treated over 100 diabetics in his time doing this. And many of those diabetics actually survived to the time when exogenous insulin was available in 1923. So his diet protocol at that time, this is the early 1900s, remember, was actually used by many, many physicians to treat diabetes, including Dr. Elliot Joslin, who I'm sure you've all heard of. Dr. Joslin, who founded the Joslin Diabetes Center. He was the foremost diabetes specialist in the world at that time. He was using this diet plan. So Dr. Bernstein's protocol: 6 grams of slow-acting carbohydrates at breakfast, 12 grams of slow-acting carbohydrates at lunch, and 12 grams of slow-acting carbohydrates at dinner, not lunch. Sorry.
Oh, whoops. I missed it.
And the biggest key here is lots and lots of protein. He actually says that most physically active people need 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. And if you're an athlete or a growing kid, you're going to probably need a lot more than that. Now, everybody's always saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, I heard it from my endocrinologist, you can't eat that much protein, it'll give you kidney disease. It'll shut down your kidneys. Well, that's not really true, because what causes kidney disease is the elevated blood sugars, not the amount of protein. So as long as you're keeping your blood sugars normal, that much protein isn't going to hurt you. It's actually going to help you. And the reason why, so basically the goal of this protocol is blood sugar stability. And this is another sciencey thing, so I'm gonna read it so I make sure I get it right. So yeah, blood sugar stability is the ultimate goal. We're told that our A1C level is how we know if our blood sugars are good, right? So it is possible to have a normal A1C that is between 4.5 and 5.4 and still have blood sugars that are way out of range and causing complications. So look at it this way. If you check your blood sugar 10 times and 5 of those times your blood sugar is over 140 and 5 of those times it's under 80, your blood sugar is still gonna come in at 115, which is an A1C level of 5.4. Now, A1C is a measure of your blood sugar average for 3 months. So that's hundreds of readings, hundreds of blood sugars. So it makes it much easier to have a normal A1C with blood sugars that are way too high and blood sugars that are way too low. This leads to complications, which we're trying to avoid. But what we really want is this beautiful graph right here. I got this from Dr. Bernstein. An average glucose of 84, which is an A1C of 4.8 with those beautiful lines, a few outliers because you're never gonna get it 100% perfect all the time, but you keep away a lot of those complications. So this is kind of my routine, well, sort of. I found that on this protocol, regular insulin, remember that one that I was put on 30 years ago, that very first insulin that I was put on, I use that still. I use that primarily. I do use Novolog, that's the super fast acting, one of the newer fast acting ones. I use very, very tiny amounts of that to correct any blood sugars that are out of range. Although I am experimenting with using regular for corrections, and I'm so far really liking it because it doesn't have the drastic impact that those fast acting ones do. I also use Tresiba, which is it is a long acting insulin, otherwise known as basal insulin. Dr. Bernstein does talk about a couple others, Lantus, Levemir, Toujeo, and he said he has found in his 70-something years or however many years it is of practicing medicine, that multiple daily injections, or MDI, seems to work best for this protocol. But if you have a pump, you can still make it work. He's not going to take away your insulin pump if you're on a pump. So, but now you guys are saying, I'm sure, but they told me that if I don't give my kid carbohydrates, he's not going to grow, or she's not going to grow. There's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. We're getting back into the sciencey stuff, so I want to make sure I get it right here. So there are, however, essential fatty acids, and there's essential amino acids. Amino acids are proteins. But, yeah, and you need those things in order to survive. You do not need carbohydrates in order to survive, because the body has this wonderful little mechanism where it takes protein and converts it to glucose via a slower system called gluconeogenesis. And I'm not going to try to explain that now because there are sometimes I barely understand it. But the fact of the matter is, you don't need carbohydrates. So as basically the point is, as long as enough protein is consumed, you or your child or whomever is going to continue to grow and be healthy. Now, I'm a member of a group of almost 4,000 type 1 diabetics online, and we all follow Dr. Bernstein's protocol. And I don't have the exact numbers, but I know several thousand of them are children. So I'm just going to introduce you to a few of them with their permission. They all gave me their pictures and stuff. This is Jack. He was diagnosed at age 2, and his last A1C was 4.7. Okay. This is Claire at 11. Last A1C, 5.2. This is my friend Stephanie. She's only been following Dr. B for about 5 years, and she's already got her A1C down to 5.7.
So Jessica, normally kids doing this, their A1C is
All over the place. I've got a slide coming up that'll show what the average for kids is. But this is Noah. He's such a cutie. His mom posts pictures of the foods she makes for him every day, and it always is adorable. His last A1C is 5.9. He was diagnosed at 20 months, so not even 2 years old, and he was already having to take injections and all that good stuff. Okay, I'm gonna try to go through these kind of quickly because there's a lot of them. The point is, there's a lot of people who do this. This River. His mother actually founded an organization that I would strongly suggest if you guys are interested in this. It's called Let Me Be 83, that basically is advocating for normal blood sugars for diabetics. This lady had her baby, I think, about 1.5 years ago. Healthy baby, normal weight, no trouble. Which diabetics are often told they can't have healthy babies. I was told that. Melanie, this chick is amazing. She was on disability for many, many years, was dealing with horrible complications. And in the last year, since starting on Dr. B, she's gotten her blood sugars down, her complications have resolved, and now she's working full-time as a paramedic. That's a stressful job, and she's managing it.
Wow.
This guy, type 1 diabetic, has been following Dr. Bernstein for 1 year. That A1C is normal, 5.0. You know what he does for fun? Ultra marathons. I would not want to do that, but hey, if it makes him happy, it makes him happy. A few more people here. This guy's a little cutie too.
Does this work the same way with type 2?
It does, yes, yes. It actually, oh shoot, too many of those. Alright. Yeah, I don't have a lot of pictures of type 2 diabetics because I'm in an online group of type 1 diabetics, but his Dr. Bernstein's book talks about how it basically is just as good or better for type 2 diabetics than it is for type 1 diabetics.
Now,
So,
can I ask a question?
yes.
When you say carbs, all vegetables have carbs.
Yeah,
But you mean no potatoes?
right. That's the difference. Remember we said slow digesting, high fiber vegetables. No,
Think above the ground.
yeah,
Above the
yeah,
ground.
there you go, above the ground.
Most of them, except for the winter squashes.
No.
They are
My
above
friend
the ground.
Alex here,
Covered.
she had advanced diabetic retinopathy and severe gastroparesis. She's managed to resolve her retinopathy, and the gastroparesis is getting better. She's not done yet. Gastroparesis is a paralyzed stomach, just by following Dr. Bernstein's methods. And there's me. I had to put myself in there because my last A1C was 5.4, which is the lowest it has been in the 30 years that I've been a diabetic. So I count myself among the people who are very thankful for Dr. Bernstein. Now this guy is amazing. David, he's 15 years old, and he's lucky enough that he's been following Dr. Bernstein since he was diagnosed at age 9. He's extremely active, plays junior varsity sports, and has normal blood sugars. A1C of 4.6.
Whoa.
Now he does have the benefit as his father is Dr. Bernstein's personal assistant, so, you know.
Hey.
He got lucky, I guess, for that. And this is David, and this is his average blood sugar. You see that beautiful line? Doesn't go above 120, doesn't go below 50.
Wow.
But compare that to the average for a type 1 diabetic teenager, where their A1C is 9. Remember how we were talking about those ups and downs? Look how high up and how low down. It goes all over the place.
Oh.
So which you want for you or your kids? So the point is, even if you have diabetes, normal blood sugars are possible. Complications are not inevitable, and we can live long, healthy lives well past that 69-year-old cutoff. So special thanks to R.D. Dykman, who is the father of David and Dr. B's personal assistant. He's the one that got me a lot of the graphs and pictures from here. If you are interested in joining a group of diabetics who follow Dr. Bernstein, feel free to go to facebook.com/type1grit. That's the community page, and you can start getting some questions answered. But I definitely recommend everybody read the book, because that book is life-changing. So there's some references.